and welcome to You Are Medicine. I'm your host, Thuy Nguyen, and today I am talking to Dr. Bayo Akomolafe. Among other things, Dr. Akomolafe is a poet, philosopher, author, celebrated international speaker, and teacher. He often leads his own introductions, acknowledging with gratitude his partnership to his wife EJ and the gift of being a father to their children. I stumbled upon Dr. Akomolafe's work at the beginning of the pandemic, during a time of great stress and uncertainty. Collectively, our stress was intensifying over all the crises that we turned our attention to: climate change, social inequities, race relations, political corruption, economic instability, increasing violence, not to mention the virus itself. I had the sense that these were not all separate issues, but perhaps different branches from the same tree, and that tree was in a bad shape. To help the branch, we have to attend to the root, and that's what we do in traditional Chinese medicine. When I ran across Dr. Akomolafe's work, I was struck by his approach. It seemed in line with the spirit of traditional Chinese medicine, tracing things back to their roots. And so, getting to the root of things was what I had in mind to talk with Dr. Akomolafe about. So, I always love to start at ground zero, from the beginning, very basic, simple concepts that we take for granted, we throw around as if there's a consensus on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what healing means to you. Healing.
So I don't think of concepts, ideas as stable entities. I think of them as migrants. They're moving as well. They're doing things with the world. If you were to ask me, what's the meaning of table, right? Someone who thinks in terms of stable beings in the world, platonic entities, might tell you a table is this, and the perfect form of a table is a square thing with 4 legs and blah, 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 blah. I don't see the world in that way. The world is too fluid and processual and performative for table to have a distinct or final meaning. And back to what you're asking about, healing. The concept or the meaning of healing can only come from within the context that creates it, or the apparatus that secretes it. From within civilization, modern civilization, settlement, colonial settlement, healing takes on the shape of a politics of restoration, right? There's a breach in the body, and what we try to do as healers is to close the rift, is to attend to the metabolic rift that is at large. And so healing becomes whatever arts and sciences and rituals and rites of passage that restore a body to an image, a habitual image, something we're used to, right? Like if I sprout an eye on my back, healing would become exorcising that spirit, right? Chasing away that demon.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But there's another sense of healing that I think is barely discernible, especially in times when the moral, ethical, sociological, and material pillars that hold up modern civilization are hollowing out. This other sense of healing is what I try to gesture towards when I name myself a trans-public intellectual, right? A public intellectual speaks truth to power. It's a form of medicine, right? It's to restore bodies that have been oppressed to a place of esteem with a nation state, right? But a trans-public intellectual is one who is suddenly confronted with a wound, a gaping wound in the assemblage of civilization, something that refuses to close up, whether it's climate chaos, whether it's death, whether it's the historicity of Black enslavement, something that does not lend itself to resolution. a gaping wound, right? A virus, a pandemic. Healing then takes on a new shape. It becomes about how do we, instead of restoring the body we're used to, how do we shape shift? How do we become other? How do we become animal? How do we become ecology? How do we fall out of time? How do we become fugitive? Healing then becomes not a politics of restoration, which is relationally conservative, like let's get you back in shape, let's put you back in order, to the psychologist, shrinking your problems, go on, be productive in the society again. It becomes, how do we pay attention to what this wound is inviting us to see? How do we embark upon a journey with this winding and fractious creature? How do we play with this entity? So depending on the place you're standing in, if you're within the city, gestating in the city, you want to get to pay your bills. You want to wake up in the morning and be ready to go. But something cracks open your neck. Healing would be restoring, putting a Band-Aid on it. But what if cracks are not just empty spaces? What if they're active absences? What if they're invitational? What if they're hospitable to cultural progression? What if they're the whisperings of tricksters? So I would end, it this way, sitting with a shaman-like figure in Nigeria more than a decade ago. I asked a question related to healing, something like what you just did to me right now, right? This is for my PhD. I said, how do you treat auditory hallucination? How do you get rid of it? How do you whatever, blah, 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 blah. And he was confounded. He was confused by my question. It's like, why would you want to heal that? What if that's your grandmother reaching out to you? What if that's an ancestor? What if that's a grandfather? So this is the tension between different paradigms. The one wants to restore, one wants to explore.
As Bayo finished with the story of the shaman regarding auditory hallucinations, not as illness, but as invitation, I thought about my mother. My mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia when I was 7 years old, and so far as I can remember, my mother has been pathologized by the people around her and the American mental health system. As a child, I learned that my mother was not normal, broken, crazy, dangerous even, and that there was no question that what she was experiencing, including auditory hallucinations, was a thing to be cured and controlled, or at the very least suppressed. Later on as an adult, I learned that what is known as schizophrenia in America are the same signs and symptoms in other times and other cultures, which may have been regarded as shamanic gifts, communications and insight into the spirit world only granted to a lucky few. I don't mean to offer this to exotify or glorify the very real turmoil that I witnessed in my mother, but it was unclear to me whether the suffering she endured was exclusively from the signs and symptoms we call schizophrenia, or whether she was also suffering from the pathologizing and medical treatment of schizophrenia, which included shutting her down at all costs, at times isolating her from her family, electroshock therapy, and pharmaceuticals. When she was considered to be doing better, it seemed to me that just meant she was controlled and quieter, which meant less threatening. I asked her over the years if she continues to have auditory hallucinations. She says she does. She just knows not to talk about it. What Bayo is talking about, I get it, not just conceptually, but personally. The illness in a different context can be an invitation to exploring something more than just a so-called cure. However, at the time and context I was in, no one around me had any sense that there could have been a different way. There was such an overwhelming unilateral agreement to control and suppress the schizophrenic symptoms. I thought about bringing that into the conversation and hesitated, and decided to offer something more present to our times, and perhaps even more intimate to me than my mother's illness. I offered my own experience with an illness and how I suffered it based on the context and times we are now in. I dived into the crack of my illness, as Bayo puts it, and explored. When you're talking, I'm thinking about that crack being COVID, of course, the virus. And I remember because I got COVID at the time where it was the scariest, where all the images we see are people dying. And I was very surprised to find that as I was sick, my greatest fear wasn't actually about my own health. It was all the shaming and all the all the other things related at that time to getting the virus. I, for myself, chose not to get the vaccine, which is very uncommon in this very liberal area.
Me
And
too.
I've made many unusual choices, and the fear of my choices and the fear of its impact on my social relationships and the
Mhm.
shame of having gone to a party when I was sick, all of that was more feverish inside me than the actual virus.
And the actor virus. Yes, I know.
And I confronted all of those things. And at the end of the illness, I came to see my illness as a medicine, actually. You know, almost that it
Mhm.
took that intensity for me to continue on this journey, which is confronting my own deep conditioning and all
Mm.
the tentacles of things that we don't normally consider illness or virus, that I was struggling with more than the fear of my own illness or my own sick body.
Mm.
And I've talked to many people because of the field I'm in, many people who have gotten COVID and similar experience of it illuminating or opening up for them, or it as medicine
Mm.
rather than illness, which is kind of a turn of understanding. And also reminds me, because I've heard you talk about when medicine falls ill,
Yeah.
and then my experience when illness becomes medicine.
Medicine. Yes, yes. Beautiful, beautiful frame. Beautiful frame.
And maybe you can speak a little bit more of this idea of when medicine falls ill.
Yes. It's when healing becomes ironic, or healing becomes, because we're not isolated beings living within environments. We are sticky, embodied aspects, and I use aspects very poetically, not sectorally, but we're embodied aspects of a dynamic, moving ecology that is deeply agonistic. It is more than harmonious. It is very chaotic. We like to make things neat and tidy, but that the world is not available for that kind of easy business is scandalous to modern citizenry, I think. So I thinking that there are moments when healing actually gets in the way of transformation. It forms a cocoon, and a cocoon is meant to be this helpful, preservative biological technology. We're talking about a moment when the cocoon becomes a trap, when it incarcerates us. So I think of healing then as that there are moments when healing becomes carceral, when the medicine becomes iatrogenic, right? Iatrogenesis is being this biological observation, medical observation, that the very attempt to cure you has harmed you even further. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a territory of acting that becomes impervious to ecological migrancy, to what the world is doing. And because it's so stuck in its habits and its rituals, it doesn't know how else to respond to the world. It becomes non-responsive. So modern healing, in a sense, becomes non-responsive to the challenges, ecological challenges, and invitations of our time. But what you're speaking about, when illness becomes a medicine, reminds me of cracks, right? Where the sickness is actually a herald, an invitation for us to lose our way,
Yeah.
right? To fall, and maybe in falling, have a grand new perspective altogether.
The new perspective that emerged for me, that illness can function as medicine, harked back to medicine ceremonies that made me feel extremely sick. It was in those experiences that made it possible for me to let go of deep attachments to perspectives and beliefs that were limiting to me, even if at one point those same perspectives illuminated something new and useful to me. And this is akin to what Bio is talking about, a point where modern medicine becomes a trap into itself, a cocooning that traps us and makes us sick rather than nourish and grow us. For me, healing and modern medicine are quite different and often contradictory things. The worldview of modern medicine is based on principles that are used as a way of fixing people in order to fit them back into the colonial paradigm, which upholds hierarchical and exclusive systems that foster illness in many ways. And this is what Bio was speaking to. In contrast to modern medicine, healing to me is a state of harmonious movement that governs nature, including us. It isn't just what we land on when we fall through the cracks. It is the crack and the falling itself. This movement towards harmony can look any which way. It can even look like chaos or pain or disorder or dis-ease. Pain is part of healing, and even illness is part of healing. Illness as medicine. What I feel is that everything is in service of this deeper heartbeat of healing. When we are in rhythm to this beat, it eventually becomes ease. When we resist it, it becomes dis-ease. Medicine that is harmonious with healing supports collective well-being. Medicine that supports systems that create pain and disharmony, even if it can temporarily prolong life or coerce pain-free states, will create more disharmony. And that is when medicine may become iatrogenic. I wonder what it takes and how much of the instinct to try to heal and get back to normal in the other way.
Mm-hmm.
What informs that instinct to do that? You know, because the world is the way it is because it's the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes speaking about it as if it's separate from us is hard for me because, you know, I think inside myself, it takes so much energy and, in a way, courage, because I live in some ways, a very dogmatic culture, to even think a little bit differently, and then even more so to take a step in a different direction. It feels like it takes so much, and I understand when we don't. I understand when it's too much. And even as I can see things, even if I see what's happening before me, I am still getting nervous. You know, so it's like intellectual and conceptual and understanding is a beginning. But I think, what does it take in us to actually risk the thing that we're holding, we think is valuable, that we're holding so hard onto, you know, which is the normal order of things.
I've said that we act not as individuals, we act as assemblages. We act as aspects of environments and ecologies, and we're constantly moving. Your question is, why are we so stuck on, what are we trying to preserve? Why are we so stuck on this thing and preserving this? I think we're in some form of contract, if you will. This contract is not volitional. It's not societal. It's maybe at some molecular, subconscious level. We have given a promise to modern civilization with the ways that our bodies and subjectivities are shaped and appellated to the city. We worship this moment. We worship stability. We worship permanence. The way that our architecture rises into the sky like a phallic intrusion into the cosmos, the way we create and rationalize the environment also creates us in return, right? We don't just create technology. Technology also secretes us. So in that way, we have formulated, you know, a sticky assemblage that is quite antagonistic to and impervious to pain, to anything that creeps in, to a virus that is inviting us to lose our way. We don't want to hear about it. And Hollywood often tells us that story in different ways. An alien ship comes through the clouds, military brass immediately pulled out, and we hover our thumbs over a red gleaming button. We will bomb the shit out of you, right? That's the story of, it seems, what we speculatively call modern civilization, right? So I think we are part of this assemblage, and that's why I often say that we need a break. And I don't mean we need to take a rest. I mean, we need something to break that machinery open.
I thought about Bio's response to my question of what it might take for things to move in a harmonious direction. A break, something to break that machinery, that cocoon to crack open. His response leaves me wanting because, frankly, all I see are breaks and cracks that we've been unable to patch up completely. The water is seeping through and the ship is sinking. Do we need a break as big as an asteroid to demolish us before we stop this nonsense? I thought a bit more on his words, and Bio speculates that we are in some form of contract, one that is not volitional or societal, but he speculates that exists on a molecular subconscious level, and I think about what that might mean. I think he is referring to things that are so innate to us and our connections to life that we no longer examine or question them. What subconscious, non-volitional, non-societal things contract me to this existence? It's a big question, and it leads me to think about things like ancestors and primal instincts to survive. The things that we don't typically recognize, but that condition us deeply, and this led me to engage Bio in a conversation around fear. I think a lot about fear, and maybe, I don't know if it's the reason, but I think that a large energetic emotion or whatever that informs how things are done is through fear, right? It's very motivated by fear and protection of ourselves or protection of people we love. And I think I always think to myself that if I got to the bottom of fear, that if I wasn't motivated by fear, then the world would look like a very different place. And that's very much connected to healing to me, because I understand modern medicine comes from fear. Every single strategy or even conversation around medicine and illness is motivated by fear. And fear, for me, inhibits a true understanding and curiosity and looking at the world and at ourselves. It kind of does the opposite of connects us. It isolates us. It's central to my own navigating ways in which I can make these conversations accessible and tangible to an everyday experience, because the more I confront these things in myself, the more layers of fear I find there. And I think that this is very much connected to healing, actually, because I think at the core of many dis-ease is stress, and stress is just another word for fear, really. And maybe you're saying that we should feel stress. It's very stressful, and to stay with the stress is instrumental. But I think that the natural instinct to be pain-free, like to take your hand off of the fire, there is something that feels beyond strategy to me, beyond even a thinking, that is it our instinct to create this world? Is this world okay? I know I've said many different things, but whatever you can respond to.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and it's layered, and it speaks to the beautiful summoning that you're doing, so that one question isn't quite enough to convey one one question or one query. It becomes this viral load of other immigrants. Let me dance with instinct first. Sometimes language gets in the way of stuff. I often think of instinct as the rude dismissal of more than human intelligence, right? It's how we name things that do not recommend themselves to rational analysis. Because we keep intelligence up here. Intelligence starts from here on up, and instinct are all the things that are outside of intelligence, right? It's the horde of orcs. If you know the Tolkien mythology, it feels like we name a significant portion of the world instinctual that we refuse to allow into the colonial settlement of intelligence. How I know this is because Black bodies were once and are still closer in colonial imaginations to the animal, closer to nature. It's like the slave ship becomes this architecture of embodiment. The white body, if there's such a stable thing as a white body, that's also a colonial invention. But the white body is situated, perched on the upper deck. The middle deck is the Black body, and the lower deck is natural resources, the instinct. So I know this because historically, Black bodies have been pressed closer to the earth, towards instinct, not allowed access into the vaunted real estate of intelligence. But I want to notice that instinct is also a kind of intelligence. It's deep, intergenerational, ancestral, corporeal, sensuous, secreted, animated, vital knowledge.
Absolutely.
Passed on in ways that maybe are not available for language or for articulation or eloquent, but it's eloquent in its own way. So when we speak about instinctual responses, we're trying to say that other things are at work that go beyond intentions and motivation. How has this come to be? Then we ask very unnerving, but generatively, incapacitating and productive questions like our ancient relationship with viruses and bacteria. How did that create and summon bodies that we now have inherited today? How are we relating with the world that might be called instinctual, but is a form of ancient, deep intelligence, right? So that by instinct, we're not referring to essences, some kind of essence to how we're behaving. We're speaking about performative intergenerational intelligence that is deeper, keener, denser than rational intelligence, head knowledge.
Yes,
right?
yes. I mean, that wisdom, I'm going to call the instinct and what you're saying wisdom. When we talk about healing, there is a wisdom that we have that feels almost outside of our control. When we cut ourselves, our bodies heal. When we feel pain, that is a healing instinct. We didn't create these things. I am not sitting here beating my heart. There are ways where instincts and wisdom and healing contain our bodies. Our bodies, we all have these things. And it's this rich area that I think in terms of medicine and speaking about medicine, we speak about it as if we created or it's in our control and we have to figure it out, but it's actually just already happening.
Mm-hmm.
I just get excited when somebody is talking about that. I don't mean to interrupt, but as it pertains to fear then, and I want to hear what you're saying, is that, our emotions, I find, are both globbed in with instincts and also informed by other things as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The question I would pose with regards to our dance with the subject of fear is, there's usually a sense in which we speak about emotions as if also they were stable things. Like there's a fear module in our brains that becomes activated or triggered in a situation that affixes itself to the neural pathways that activate that fear. My question is, what if we don't have fear? What if fear has us? or joy has us? What if emotions, those emotions we feel and we attempt to name in some kind of final way, you are fear, you are grief, you are joy, what if they're territorial and more than human and somehow enlist us in our rituals and in our practices and secrete us in the ways that we think we secrete them? So I often like to think about things like fear as also moving. It's migrant, it's fugitive, it's not stable. So which brings me to probably the most important aspect of my consideration of fear. And I did this in an article about Batman. I don't know if you've watched the movie called The Dark Knight Rises. And the whole
Yes.
premise of this superhero, this anti-hero, is that he's conquered fear. He's faced his fear and he's conquered it. He's a master of fear, right? And that goes through his whole character arc, leading to the final moments in the trilogy, the part 3, Dark Knight Rises. Now he's defeated temporarily. This is a nerd speaking. He's defeated temporarily by his villain, his nemesis, who dumps him in a prison. If you've watched the movie, I hope I'm not spoiling it. This prison is designed in such a way that it elicits hope to it. It invites you to hope. There are no bars. There's actually a route of escape, right? You can escape if you want to, but you literally have to fly. You have to become something else to escape. Everyone has tried, but no one can get out of that huge pit. Batman, who is Bruce Wayne, he doesn't have his gadgets and costumes, tries every now and then with a broken back to escape, and he fails consistently. One day he's sitting down and a man comes up to him and says, "Your problem is fear." Bruce Wayne says, "Well, I have no fear. I've conquered my fear." And the man says in return, "Well, that's the problem. You have to ally with fear. Let fear catch up with you again. Let it become a partner. And then you might make this escape." Bruce Wayne asks, "How do I do that?" He says, "Jump without the rope." That is, everyone that attempts to jump has to use a safety buckle to attempt to jump. And if you can make the jump over some ledge and attach yourself to some aspect of the pit, then you could escape, you could climb out. But no one can do it. He says, let go of the safety, let go of safety. Make the jump without the safety and see what happens. And Batman does it. And that's the apotheosis. That's the climax of the entire trilogy. This man conquered fear in the beginning, but was asked to embrace it, not as a servant, but as an ally. And when he partnered with fear, he turned from being Batman to being a bat, right? He literally flew across the chasm and climbed out, which is my long and fractious story about how sometimes we name too strictly the things that stand in the way. And maybe the illness, maybe this illness is the medicine, like you so brilliantly said.
Since my conversation with Bio, I've thought deeply about this idea of partnering with fear. As I meditated on this topic, I realized that I actually can't remember a time in my life where fear wasn't a constant companion. I was born into a time of war and raised in a colonial, capitalist, patriarchal state whose systems have contributed to violence domestically and around the world and the degradation of our ecology. To me, fear is incessant. It is in the air we breathe and in the water we drink. And maybe that's why we're so used to it, so used to the hum of anxiety that is the background or foreground of our existence. So used to it that we may no longer feel it. It's the norm. And while Batman had to partner with fear again to transform, I think actually fear never left his side. I don't think he was without fear to begin with, because why did he have the safety belt if he wasn't afraid? To feel safe, because something is in place to catch you, means that your sense of safety depends on that something, whether it's a safety belt, or a vaccine, or the police, or insurance. And of course, those things that might make one person feel safe may be out of reach for another, and worse even, may even be the thing that terrorizes another. So I would posit that if our fear is only allayed by our dependency on a thing outside of us, and that thing may in and of itself incite terror for other people, then we are actually not without fear, because there will always be the anxiety that the thing that keeps us safe ceases to work, malfunctions, or creates more terror. In a colonized state, systems are meant to keep colonizers safe, and that safety often means keeping others in bondage. So some people live in anxiety that their systems may fail to keep them safe, while others live in fear of the systems themselves. Either way, our fear is in response to the systems, either the system failing, or in the cases where we are persecuted by the system working. But what fear inspired the creation of systems that were so firmly and seamlessly put in place that we forgot they were there? Like Batman, professing he is free of fear even as he is wearing a safety belt. Maybe the break or crack that is needed is for the safety device or system to break, which actually is what is currently happening. We fear viruses or the vaccines, villains or the police, nature eroding or technology, isolation or overcrowdedness. Fear makes us run away from one threat straight into the arms of another, and the cocoon is closing in. What should we do? Run faster, more frantically? The clock is ticking. The pitch of fear rises. Maybe, and I know this might be blasphemous to modern sensibilities, but maybe the thing to do is nothing, at least not do in the way we've been doing it. Maybe if we see the problematic nature in what we keep doing, desperately reinstating systems that by their design are exclusive to the well-being of the collective, and by collective, I don't mean just humans. We might just pause, and in that pausing, the fear may reveal things to us that we hadn't seen before, and perhaps may begin to shapeshift. The doing and running away and desperation for solutions creates fear, even as it thinks it is finding the solution to fear. So if we cease to react to fear in the way that we keep reactivating it, what will become of fear? It may just transform and shapeshift, like when illness becomes medicine. Perhaps fear may shapeshift into compassion, or gratitude, or even love. Have we paused long enough to think about the things we think we are afraid of? Or are we busy presuming everything is fearful because we are so used to fear being a way of life? Is it something that fear is in the air, or despair is in the air? Would you say that?
There's a sense in which fear is in the air. I mean, you don't need to read the transmission of affect to get a sense that there is some validity when we say that an emotion is in the air, or you could cut or slice the thickness of affect within a room, right? I wonder how modernity is co-producing fear. I wonder how the temporality of endings, right? Like the future is no longer to come. We are dead because of climate chaos. There's no future any longer. This is it. I wonder how that is co-creating fear. And I wonder then what the illness is inviting us to consider.
Can you name the illness, Bio?
I think the illness is trauma, maybe one of them. I think trauma, what we name trauma, is the assemblage of body-proofing rituals with which we defend against the influx of the more than human. And I base this definition of trauma on a certain reading of trauma as an industrial politics. It's not just a clinical event. It's quite a political project. It's imbricated with the city, with the rise of industrialization and fast-moving technologies. There's a whole story there. It's caught up in the nation-state notions of victimology, ideas of who gets compensation and who doesn't. It's more than just a clinical event. It's a technology for co-producing and manufacturing the proper subject, the proper citizen subject. So I often think of trauma as what we name the ways our bodies are proofed against this wind, this fierce the fierce eddies of dust that feel so threatening to our projects of permanence, right? And I say this, with relation to what I said about that shaman, saying, what if this thing that disturbs you, this thing that traumatizes you, what if it's the voice of an ancestor? What if it's a voice of, and this is the reason why people like Felix Guattari, Fernand Deligny, Gilles Deleuze, beautiful thinkers, this is why they would suggest that the schizophrenic is free.
When people talk about trauma, and also in these areas, we're often talking about, there's a victim of trauma, the person who's received in events or situations that create a lot of pain and disharmony. It gets frozen in time, unable to let go of. And then there's a remedy for that trauma, or an attempt at a remedy inside the person.
Yeah, Twee, but very quickly, the receiving of a painful event is not adequate to the naming of a victim. By that, I mean, other things are part of the naming. You just said the person who receives the painful event is the victim. But there are other things as part of that assemblage.
That.
Okay, please.
I get that. And I think for me, just looking at how it's normally talked about, I also flip that on the head. In those situations, I think who needs the treatment? Is it the so-called victim that needs the treatment? Or who is producing the trauma, and what is connected to the creation of what we call trauma? Why are we treating the end result of a system that is creating trauma all the time? So, why is an Indigenous person who has so-called PTSD, we have to treat them so that they can function within a very sick system that has created this? Like, we need to treat the trauma producing cloud, all of those things. And we don't think about that ever. We're constantly treating people to fit into a very sick system.
Yes.
It's considerations like this that I think about when I hear what you're saying. And I'm not quite sure that you're saying these things, but it's what it makes me think inside myself.
We're saying the same things. To treat the system that creates trauma. And how does the system create trauma? When we say the system creates trauma, that's no different from saying the system creates bodies to withstand, to continue to push away against emergence, right? This is what body proofing means. It means that instead of seeing trauma as, psychologists think of trauma as the event outside, the external event that disturbs the self. Already inherent in that definition of trauma is an allocation of where the self begins and stops, right? Right? Like, outside, where did you get that from? According to whose politics, how is that outside? Where's the self here? So there's already a political assignment of where the self is in order to say that something is external to it, right? So in that way, trauma is already a demarcation of selves. It's already an assignment of bodies. It wants to coddle the modern mind. It's a carving of where Twee's body ends and where it begins, right? So that's what we mean, that you're saying. And when you say, for instance, then, that this system recreates trauma, that's how it does. In creating the bodies, it secretes the same conditions that led to those bodies being created. So it's a toxic cyclicity.
Yes. As I contemplate treating systems that create and recreate trauma rather than treating the outcome of these systems, I wondered what that would look like. At first glance, the thought of putting needles in the political system or judicial system or even educational system seemed laughable. But I kept chewing on this idea, and I came to the understanding that I may not be able to treat conceptual systems outside myself, but I can and do treat bodies as hosts to these systems. This is the traditional Chinese medicine understanding of microcosms reflecting macrocosms. Although we talk about systems and society as a thing to be contemplated outside of us, they actually are within us, informing us, creating and recreating who we think we are, what we think our value or worth is, what we see as threat, and how we navigate this world for our own safety and well-being. We refer to social systems programming as reality, and in our collective agreement, our world gets created. The programming is so insidious that even when it hurts us, however large the scale, we're still unconsciously trying to keep the program running because we rarely suspect that what we deem as a static reality are perpetual choices we make as we unconsciously recreate the thing that hurts us, recreate the cocoon of fear. So how to treat these failing systems? I think first to recognize the system lives inside us, entertain the notion that it may be changeable, recognize its harmful effects, and then change the programming to one that is healing, harmonious, and life-affirming, rather than stressful, agonistic, and fear-producing. This isn't a mental exercise. It's a profound confrontation with our responsibilities and fears. And if it sounds overwhelming, as if we have to overthrow the patriarchy or squash capitalism or fight the oppressors, I would say look closer at the programming and that fear, and be sure that the reflex to do and squash and fight isn't just a recreation of that programming. Perhaps the remedy at any moment can be as simple as a leisurely nap, playing with your kids, an unarmed hug, or a good courageous cry. If you think these things are silly, don't mean anything, are embarrassing, check your programming. If these suggestions anger you, you think that all the world's problems are due to people who are already lazy and indulging in these things, I invite you to check your programming again. You deserve to relax. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to feel and be however you are, and yes, even as, and perhaps because, the world is on fire.
When I listen to what you talk about, I come to this feeling of an invitation to find myself in the present moment and to love everything that makes up who I am. It's not a romantic notion, but it's the indigenous wisdom and ancestors, and it is the modern technology, and it is all the things that create me in this moment.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
you're not pushing away anything. And I think that that's why it feels confusing, because I think that we're so used to grabbing on and pushing away and wanting a neat package of something to call our own, so something to be like, okay, this is me and it's good.
Yeah. Yes.
But time keeps happening and changes keep happening, and we are everything that keeps happening inside us. And
Yes.
in that sense, I find for myself, in my definition or understanding of healing changes, but at this point, it feels like a radical acceptance of everything. I don't know. Feels very healing. It's a type of surrender.
Mm.
And there's something very peaceful about it, actually. And something that feels like very loving about it, to actually just surrender to everything that is. And I think within that, sometimes the fear that the conditioning comes in, and it's like, well, then what are you going to do if everything is just okay? What's going to happen? And I think that voice comes in a lot anytime this sort of work for me, listening to you, or me just trying to navigate inside a completely different way of being. The conditioning feels incessant. And we can talk about subtleties because I think it does get to that point, but the subtle becomes very loud to me, actually, that anytime that it becomes so intrusive. And I guess I don't know how this connects to a question that I have for you, but Bio, why do you do what you do?
Why I have no
How do you do what you do?
I have no idea. Again,
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like a very strange question, but
okay, you know what? I'm going to entertain the question and I'm going to answer with two mouths. The first mouth is why? Why do I do the things I do? I was born September 18, 1983, which is numerologically significant. I'm a Virgo. So there's some cosmic alignment that has, I think at 9 p.m. And if you notice, if you actually add the numbers up, it all comes to 9. There's a 999393939 that shows up. In my culture, 3s and 9s are tricksters, right? There's a trickster force that is there. So if we're looking for the transcendent, which is fine as well, it's beautiful, then that might offer a why to the question. How is a different question. How do I do the things I do? I do the things I do because my beautiful, dear wife takes care of the kids when I sit in front of the laptop. How do I do the things I do? Because we eat good food here. We wake up in the morning, I drink and take lots of water sometimes, and sometimes I don't. And I suffer lapses in memory, and it shows. And sometimes when I'm thinking or speaking and I lose track of what I was saying, I do the things I do because my children support me. They pray for me. They wish their dada well. They make me tell stories about what I've said today. And it kind of brings everything together. It gives me a sense of place. It anchors me to the moment. It helps me realize that they're the reason, or they're the anchor, they're the ground, the matrix through which I think about everything. My theoretical models, my concepts, however useful or unuseful they turn out to be. So the how is very imminent and ordinary. And it doesn't even centralize me at all. It speaks to movements at large. It speaks to generosity. How do I come to say the things I say? Because of you. The questions you're asking are majestic questions, Tui. They're beautiful. And I thank your fear and your conditioning. However pathological they may be framed in other contexts, I thank them for offering us this moment, right? This moment is the reason how I do the things I do. So, yes.
To thank the fear, as Bio does, is akin to thanking the illness, and perhaps that's when fear and illness shapeshifts into medicine itself. When we can pause to look again at fear, rather than the reflex to run away, fix, or destroy, we may develop a gratitude towards the fear as an invitation, a wisdom, and that feeling of gratitude itself begins to shapeshift us, and therefore society and systems. Believe it or not, I was really afraid to talk with Bio. He's like a rock star to me. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to follow what he was saying, ask stupid questions, or just freeze. And then I was afraid that I may not get to talk to him at all. We had to postpone the conversation twice, and I wondered if we'd ever connect. There's always something to be afraid of. But I saw my fear as an invitation even before we had our conversation. And look what happened when I accepted and fell into that crack. This gift of a show for you, for all of us. Deep gratitude to Bio for your generous sharing of time, thoughts, and heart, and to all of you for listening. I hope this program is healing and transformative for you in the best of ways. To find out more about Dr. Bio Akomolafe's work, you can go to bioakomolafe.net. Music in this program by Teops, Father Sleep, and Lobo Loco. If you feel inspired by this show, pass it along to someone who would benefit from hearing these healing messages. For more information, you can visit bcaclinic.com/urmedicine and tune in for our new monthly shows.